Hello, my dear friend. I know what it's like when you wake up in the morning and that weight is already there, waiting for you before your feet even touch the ground. That feeling that the day will be just another one among many others that are difficult to bear. The thoughts that arise in the dark of the bedroom, wondering if things will ever really get better or if this pain, this confusion, this tiredness is simply what life has in store for you. Sometimes it seems that everyone around you has found a secret manual on how to live, except you. I also know what it's like to look back and see so many efforts that seem to come to nothing. The plans you made so carefully that fell apart one after the other. The times you mustered up all your courage to try again, only to come up against another obstacle, another disappointment, another reason to doubt yourself. And how tiring it is to smile and say, "I'm fine," when inside there is a maelstrom of fears, doubts, and a sadness that seems to have no end. You wonder if anyone would really understand if you told them how you really felt. Those moments in front of the mirror are the most revealing, aren't they? When you look at your reflection and barely recognize the person standing there. The eyes that once sparkled now seem to contain clouds of worry. The smile that comes with effort and rarely reaches the eyes. The posture that bends a little more with each new difficulty. And above all, that internal conversation that has become so critical, so relentless, telling you over and over again that you're not enough, that you'll never get through this, that maybe you don't even deserve better days. The nights are often the hardest, when the silence amplifies every worrying thought. You toss and turn in bed as the clock ticks away painfully slowly. Your body is exhausted, but your mind refuses to rest, replaying conversations, decisions, mistakes, projecting increasingly bleak future scenarios. The darkness of the room seems to reflect the darkness you feel inside. And no matter how many people there are around you during the day in these moments of dawn, the loneliness seems absolute and insurmountable. I know that feeling of being trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. Every path you try seems to lead you back to the same starting point, or worse, down even narrower alleys. You watch other people moving forward, building their lives, reaching goals, celebrating achievements, while you seem to be running on a treadmill that won't go anywhere. It's as if there's a glass wall between you and the world where things work, where happiness is possible, where tomorrow is not feared, but awaited with anticipation. And there's that insistent voice inside you that compares your stage with other people's stages. Social media doesn't help, showing only the brightest moments of other people's lives while you know every detail of your own struggles. You wonder why for some everything seems so easy, so natural, while for you every little step requires so much effort. The injustice of it all hurts, doesn't it? And it hurts even more when you try to explain it and hear in response phrases like, "think positive," or "others have worse problems." Perhaps the hardest thing is the feeling that you've let down your past self. Remember that young person full of dreams, plans, and certainties about what their life would be like? That person who believed they could conquer the world, that they deserved love, success, and happiness? It's painful to think what that more hopeful version of you would think if you could see where you are now, struggling to find reasons to go on, to believe that something better is possible. The distance between what you dreamed and what you live seems insurmountable. I know how every little task can seem like a mountain when you're carrying the weight of despair. Getting out of bed, taking a shower, preparing a meal, things that for others are automatic, for you require gathering strength that you hardly believe you still possess. The simple act of existing through another day becomes a test of endurance. And you often wonder how much longer you can endure, how much longer it makes sense to keep trying when everything seems so pointless. It's especially difficult when the people around you seem unable to understand the depth of what you're feeling. They say things like, "it will pass," or "you need to try harder," as if your pain is just a choice, a character flaw, or a lack of determination. They don't see the invisible battles you fight every day, the small triumphs that represent getting through one more dawn, one more meal, one more social interaction when everything inside you begs to give up, to retreat, to disappear. There are moments when you question whether it was something you did. If you somehow deserve this suffering, if this is a punishment for past choices, for words not said, for paths not taken. Guilt is a frequent companion, isn't it? It whispers that if you had been better, stronger, smarter, more determined, perhaps you wouldn't be in this situation now. It's an additional burden that you carry, this constant questioning, this incessant search for where you went wrong to deserve so much suffering. And yet, even in the midst of all this storm, there is a small part of you that refuses to give up completely. A stubborn spark that, against all odds, still believes that someday things can be different. You may not even consciously realize it, but it's there. It's what makes you seek help, read texts like this one, try once again to get up after every fall. That little light, however dim it may seem now, holds a secret that few realize. It is stronger than all the darkness you feel. Let me tell you something that you may find hard to believe right now, but that I carry with me as a certainty. From where I can see it, this pain that seems eternal is actually temporary. Not like a passing storm, but like a harsh winter that eventually gives way to spring. Time moves in ways we can't predict when we're immersed in darkness. And your future self, the one who has already crossed this valley and found the path to the light, has something very important to say to you today. Something that could completely change the way you see this moment in your journey. Have you ever noticed how nature is in no hurry? A seed buried in the dark soil doesn't question whether or not it should sprout. It simply waits for the right moment, trusting in a process it can neither see nor control. For days, weeks, sometimes months, it remains in the dark, apparently lifeless. To outsiders, nothing is happening. But inside that hard shell, a silent transformation is taking place. This period of darkness is not a punishment or a mistake. It's a necessary part of the process. Just like the darkness you find yourself in now. Think of the sunrise. It happens every morning, regardless of who is watching or not. On cloudy days, even if we can't see it, the sun is still there, fulfilling its role, moving at its own pace. The darkness of the night has never been able to stop a new day from arriving, no matter how long and deep it has been. In the same way, the difficult period you're going through doesn't have the power to prevent your inner light from eventually finding its way back to the surface. The question is not if it will happen, but when. Do you remember the first time you tried to learn something really difficult? Maybe cycling, swimming, or playing an instrument. At first, it seemed impossible. Your body didn't cooperate, your mind became frustrated. Each attempt seemed to confirm that you simply couldn't do it. But something curious happened over time. What was once impossible slowly became possible, then familiar, and eventually natural. Not because you became someone else, but because you persisted through the period of incompetence and discomfort. The seasons have a lot to teach us about the cycles of life. Winter doesn't come to stay forever. It comes to allow a much-needed rest so that new strength can be gathered beneath the surface. Trees that look dead are actually conserving energy, directing their resources to their roots, quietly preparing for the next bloom. You too are in an emotional winter, but the spring of your life is approaching, even if you can't feel its first signs yet. Imagine you're holding a jigsaw puzzle with thousands of pieces, but without the image of the box to guide you. Every painful experience, every disappointment, every moment of hopelessness seems like a random piece with no purpose or defined place. It's natural to feel confused, frustrated, and want to give up. But what your future self has already discovered is that these seemingly disconnected pieces will eventually form a picture of beauty and meaning that you couldn't imagine right now. Some of the darkest and most irregular pieces will be the very ones that give depth and character to the final image. There is an ancient Japanese technique called kintsugi, where broken vases are repaired with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they are highlighted, celebrated, and transformed into the most beautiful part of the object. The vase is no less valuable for having been broken. On the contrary, its scars make it unique, tell its story, reveal its resilience. The fractures in your heart, the cracks in your spirit, the moments when you felt completely broken are not the end of your story. They are the beginning of a deeper, more authentic beauty that is yet to be revealed. When you're stuck in a traffic jam, unable to see beyond the cars in front of you, it's easy to imagine that the traffic will go on like this indefinitely. But someone in a helicopter above can see what you can't, that just ahead the road opens up, that the flow has already started to improve, that your arrival at your destination is only a matter of time. From where your future self looks down, it can see the full panorama of your journey, including the moment when you finally emerge from this difficult period. And if it could tell you just one thing, it would be, keep moving forward, however slowly. You know that moment when you're washing dishes and the warm water finally gets through all that grease that seemed impossible to remove? For a long time, it seems like nothing is happening. You scrub and the dirt persists. But then, suddenly, something changes. The same thing is happening with your inner healing process. Beneath the surface, invisible transformations are taking place. Every time you choose not to give up, every small gesture of self-care, every moment when you recognize your pain without letting it define you, you are closer to that turning point. Have you ever noticed how our vision adapts to darkness? When you enter a dark environment from the light, you initially can't see anything. Everything seems like a black, impenetrable blur. But if you just wait without panicking, your eyes gradually adjust. Shapes begin to emerge, contours define themselves, and you realize that there was much more to see than you first thought. The same happens when we're immersed in emotional darkness. With time and patience, we begin to discern possibilities that were previously invisible to us. The most powerful stories we know follow a similar pattern. The hero faces challenges that seem impossible to overcome, moments when all seems lost, when giving up seems the only sensible option. It is precisely in these darkest moments that something unexpected happens, a turning point that could not have been foreseen. You're living your own heroic story now, facing your own inner dragons. And as with all great stories, the darkness you go through is not the end, but the necessary prelude to your transformation. Think of a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. If you could hear its thoughts during that painful process of transformation, you'd probably hear something similar to what you yourself have been thinking. It hurts too much. It's never going to end. I don't have the strength to continue. Maybe I can't do it. However, this seemingly cruel process is precisely what strengthens your wings for flight. Without this resistance, without this struggle, the butterfly would never be strong enough to fly. Your current struggle is forming the wings that will allow you to reach heights that now seem unimaginable. And there's something else I can see from where I am. Time is not as linear as we think. Your future version already exists. It has already overcome everything that now seems impossible to overcome. In a way, that wiser, healed version of you is here now, offering a hand, whispering guidance, sending little signs of hope. Those moments of unexpected clarity, that sudden strength that comes when you thought you had nothing left to give, that coincidence that seems significant, they're all little nods from your future self, reminding you that the path, although difficult, has already been mapped out and successfully traveled. There is a curious phenomenon that happens when we are deeply involved in emotional pain. Time seems distorted. A difficult day seems to last forever, while moments of relief pass in the blink of an eye. This distortion makes us believe that suffering is our permanent state and peace only a temporary visitor. Your future self has discovered the opposite. Pain is the visitor even when it seems to have taken up permanent residence in your life. And the first step to transforming your experience is to recognize this truth. Nothing stays the same forever, not even the most intense suffering. A fundamental discovery his future self made was about the power of small changes in perspective. When you're stuck in a deep pit, looking up and seeing only a small circle of light can seem discouraging. The distance to the exit seems impossible. But if you shift your focus to the walls around you, you can start to notice little bumps, points of support, places where your feet and hands can find support. It's not about magically jumping out of the pit, but about finding the next safe place to support your foot. Your future self has understood something that may now seem contradictory. The more you fight the pain, the more strength you give it. It's like struggling in quicksand. Desperate movements only sink you faster. The transformation began when he learned to make peace with the present, not in defeatist resignation, but in compassionate acceptance. I'm suffering now, and it's okay to feel that way. This simple acknowledgement, without judgment, without rushing to fix everything, is often the first genuine step towards healing. A powerful revelation came when his future self realized that he was waiting to be rescued by someone else, by external circumstances, by some dramatic change that would magically transform everything. Waiting for this rescue kept him in a state of passivity and despair. The real change began when he realized that the person who would come to rescue him was already present. It was himself, in his ability to make small daily decisions that, added up over time, would completely alter the course of his life. Do you know how sometimes a huge weight can be lifted when we simply share our truth with someone who really listens? His future self discovered that much of the additional suffering came not from the original pain, but from the isolation, the shame of feeling this way, the effort to hide everything behind a convincing smile. When he finally found the courage to reveal his truth, not to everyone but to a few carefully chosen people, he discovered that he wasn't as alone as he thought, and that vulnerability, far from being weakness, was a path to genuine connection. Another significant transformation came when his future self began to question his own narratives. I'm broken. I'll never get over it. Things will never get better. I don't deserve happiness. He realized that he treated these thoughts as absolute truths, when in reality they were just stories he had learned to tell himself, repeated so many times that they seemed incontestable. The change began when he started looking at these thoughts not as facts, but as hypotheses that could be tested and often refuted by experience. His future self made a surprising discovery about the nature of strength. He had always believed that being strong meant never showing weakness, never admitting fear, never asking for help. But on his journey, he learned that true strength often manifests itself in the ability to admit vulnerability, to recognize limitations, to reach out when needed. Paradoxically, it was when he finally allowed himself to be weak in the eyes of the world that he found an inner strength he didn't know he possessed. Slowly, his future self began to realize how his attention worked like a spotlight in a dark room. Wherever he directed that focus, that part of reality became more vivid, more real. When he focused exclusively on losses, problems, and failures, they grew in his perception until they seemed all there was. The transformation began when he learned to deliberately direct his attention also to small moments of beauty, to unexplored possibilities, to aspects of himself that remained intact despite everything. One day, his future self asked a simple but revolutionary question: what if this pain has a purpose? Not in the sense of believing that the suffering was sent as some kind of test or punishment, but recognizing that since the pain was there anyway, perhaps it could be transformed into something meaningful. This change in perspective opened up space for a possibility that had previously seemed inconceivable, that this period of darkness was not just something to be endured, but could be fertile ground for growth that could not occur in any other way. There was a moment of clarity when his future self realized that he was living with a rigid timetable for his healing. I should be better by now. I shouldn't still feel that way after all this time. This constant judgment only added a layer of self-criticism on top of the pain that already existed. Transformation came when he accepted that the healing process has its own rhythm, that it can't be rushed or forced to follow a convenient schedule. This surrender to the natural time of healing, curiously enough, often speeds up the process itself. One of the most important discoveries came when her future self began to notice how her identity had merged with her suffering. I'm a depressed person. I'm a victim. I am someone who has been broken by life. These were not just descriptions of temporary states, but had become core definitions of who he believed himself to be. The transformation began when he learned to create a little distance between himself and his experience. I am experiencing depression, instead of I am depressed. This subtle linguistic shift opened up space for the possibility of a broader self, which could contain and eventually transcend the current suffering. His future self discovered, over time, that much of his suffering came not only from the direct pain of circumstances, but from a resistance to accepting reality as it was. There was a constant wear and tear between what is and what should be. Peace began to emerge not when external circumstances magically changed to align with his desires, but when he learned to let go, at least temporarily, of his rigid expectations of how life should be. This didn't mean giving up working for change, but rather stopping waging a constant war against the present. Your future self remembers well those days when getting out of bed seemed like a Herculean task. That's when he discovered the power of breaking down any action into infinitely small parts. Not, I'm going to get up and face the day, but I'm going to move my big toe, and then I'm going to move my leg a few centimeters. There was no shame in making things as small as necessary. Over time, he realized that this approach wasn't just a trick for difficult days, it was a profound wisdom applicable to any challenge. Great transformations don't come in dramatic leaps, but in consistent tiny steps. One practice his future self adopted, even in the darkest days, was to identify a single thing that still worked, a single reason to keep going. Sometimes it was something as simple as the flavor of a fruit, the texture of a soft blanket, or the loyalty of a pet. On really difficult days, it could just be the breath. In, out, the fact that your body kept working for you even when your mind was exhausted. This practice of finding a single anchor point in the storm was often what kept you connected to life when everything else seemed meaningless. A transformative discovery was realizing the power of self-compassion. For so long, his future self believed that he needed to be hard on himself in order to improve, that self-criticism was motivating, that recognizing his suffering was self-pity. What a profound mistake. He learned to talk to himself as he would to a beloved friend in crisis, with kindness, patience, and a sincere acknowledgement of how difficult what he was facing was. This is really hard right now, and it makes sense that you're suffering. This simple shift in internal conversation often made room for deeper breathing, for a moment of peace in the midst of the storm. Her future self discovered that, paradoxically, accepting the possibility that things might never get better sometimes was exactly what created the space for improvement to begin. There was an exhausting quality to constantly maintaining anxious hope, to obsessively checking, "Am I better today? And now what?" When he finally allowed himself to say, "Maybe I'll always feel this way and I'll find ways to live a meaningful life anyway," something relaxed. And in that relaxation, in that surrender, the first genuine shoots of renewal often emerged. One practice that made all the difference was to change the question from "Why is this happening to me?" to "What is this teaching me?" The first question often has no satisfactory answer and can lead to spirals of victimization and bitterness. The second question assumes that there is potential meaning even in suffering, something that can be distilled and transformed into wisdom. It's not about denying the pain or pretending it's a blessing in disguise, but about finding ways not to come out of this difficult period empty-handed, with nothing to show for everything you've endured. Over time, his future self began to notice the signs that preceded a downward spiral, certain thought patterns, physical sensations, subtle behaviors that usually appeared before a deeper fall. He learned that these were not inevitable harbingers of suffering, but rather early warnings that gave him the chance to make small course corrections. A phone call to a friend, a walk outside, a deliberate change in physical environment, a rooting practice, small interventions that, if applied early enough, could change the trajectory of an entire day. One of the simplest but most profound practices his future self discovered was simply observing how everything naturally changes. In a moment of intense suffering, he might notice, "This is the exact feeling at this precise moment," and then, a few minutes or hours later, notice how the feeling had changed, even if subtly. It wasn't about forcing change or trying to artificially positivize, but simply witnessing the transitory nature of all emotional states. This simple practice began to dissolve the illusion of permanence that made suffering even more unbearable. His future self learned to create small rituals that served as bridges between what he was feeling and what he wanted to feel. A lit candle, a specific piece of music, an intentional physical movement, a phrase repeated with conviction even when not fully felt. These simple rituals created a symbolic space for transformation to begin to take place. They didn't magically fix anything, but they offered a path when no path seemed visible, a structure that could support the first hesitant steps towards healing. One practice that had a profound impact was redefining the meaning of productivity and success. For so long, your future self had been measured by external standards, achievements, recognition, tangible milestones. In the darkest periods, when these kinds of successes seemed impossible, he learned to celebrate victories of a different kind. Getting up despite the desire to stay in bed. Preparing a nutritious meal when it would have been easier to eat nothing at all. Responding with kindness when irritability seemed more natural. These were the real triumphs on difficult days, worthy of recognition and celebration. Your future self discovered the transformative power of helping other people, even, or especially, when you felt powerless to help yourself. Not in a way that denied or suppressed his own needs, but in simple ways that aligned with his available energy. Sometimes it was just a kind text to someone who was also suffering, other times a small act of kindness to a stranger. These seemingly insignificant actions often broke the spell of isolation and reminded him that, even in his current state, he still had something valuable to offer the world. One of the most powerful practices his future self developed was to deliberately create a growth narrative. He began to keep a record, sometimes only mentally, sometimes in writing of the ways in which he was evolving through this difficult period. Today, I noticed that I was able to feel sadness without being completely overwhelmed by it. This week, I realized that I'm better able to set healthy boundaries. I'm developing an inner strength that I didn't realize was possible. This practice didn't deny suffering, but placed it within a larger story, not just a story of loss and pain, but also of growth, learning, and gradual transformation. What his future self eventually realized was that the path was not linear. There would be days of clarity followed by weeks of confusion, moments of genuine hope followed by periods of renewed despair. This didn't mean that progress wasn't happening or that there was something wrong with it. It was simply the nature of the human journey, especially a journey through difficult terrain. He learned not to interpret the inevitable setbacks as failures or as evidence that healing was impossible. They were just bends in the road, not dead ends. From where his future self stands now, looking back, he can clearly see what was impossible to perceive during those dark days. There was a pattern, a purpose, a coherent movement even when everything seemed chaotic and meaningless. Like a mosaic seen up close, where only disconnected fragments are visible, distance has revealed the complete picture. And it is an image of surprising beauty, complexity, and meaning that could not have been imagined during the creation process. Your future self wishes that you could, even for a brief moment, see through its eyes and realize how everything fits together perfectly. There is something your future self would like you to know, something it has discovered that has changed everything. The suffering you are experiencing now is not just an obstacle to be overcome or a mistake to be corrected, it is the very path to becoming who you are destined to be. It's not that your future self has finally found a way to escape the pain, it has found a way to integrate it, to allow it to transform you into someone deeper, more compassionate, more real than you could have become by any other route. His suffering is not his enemy, misunderstood, it is actually his most powerful ally. What surprised his future self most was discovering that the happiness he eventually found was not the opposite of the pain he had experienced, but somehow included that pain, gave it context and meaning. This happiness is not fragile or dependent on perfect circumstances. It has deep roots, nourished by the very storms that threaten to destroy him. It's a happiness that doesn't fear the darkness because it has learned that darkness also has gifts to offer. It's a mature joy that knows that both light and shadow are necessary parts of a life lived to the full. His future self found a peace that didn't come from having all the answers, but from becoming comfortable with the questions. For so long, he sought certainties, definitive explanations, a clear map of the territory ahead. True liberation came when he embraced the mystery of being alive, the fundamentally unpredictable and uncontrollable nature of existence. Not with fear or resignation, but with a sense of wonder and even adventure. Living without all the answers, he discovered, is not a limitation to be overcome, but a space of possibilities to be explored. One of the most profound discoveries his future self made was that love, real, unconditional, resilient love, was not something to be sought primarily externally, but a capacity to be developed internally. For so long, he had looked to other people for a love that could fill the emptiness he felt, heal the wounds he carried. What he didn't realize was that his own journey through the darkness was developing within him a capacity to love himself and others, with a depth and authenticity that hadn't been possible before. The pain that seemed to be closing his heart was actually opening it in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Looking back now, his future self can see how every apparent defeat, every dashed expectation, every relationship that didn't work out was actually making room for something truer, more in line with who he really is. Like a sculpture that emerges from marble not through what is added but what is removed, his true nature was being revealed through the very experiences that seemed to be destroying him. It's not that the universe or some higher force had planned his suffering, but his response to life's inevitable suffering created a unique work of art that could not have come about in any other way. There's something your future self understands now that has completely changed your relationship with challenges. Resilience isn't a fixed characteristic that some people are born with and others aren't. It's more like a muscle that grows stronger precisely through stress and recovery. Every time you face something difficult and somehow manage to get through it, however imperfectly, that muscle gets a little stronger. What your future self wants you to know is that you are already in the process of developing an inner strength that will one day surprise you, not in spite of your current struggles, but precisely because of them. One of the most liberating realizations your future self achieved was to realize that it was never a question of completely eliminating darkness, but of learning to carry your own light. There are dark places in the world, dark moments in life, that nothing can completely dispel. The real transformation didn't come from some magical illumination that banished all shadows, but from the gradual discovery of a source of inner light that remains a light even in the darkest of environments. This light is not something he had to look for outside himself or conquer. It was there all along, waiting to be recognized, trusted, and shared. You wonder if one day you'll feel normal again, if you'll regain that sense of lightness and simplicity that you seem to have lost. Your future self wants you to know that what's waiting for you is actually something much better than normal. It's a way of experiencing life that is richer, more present, more connected than anything you've known before. It's not that you'll eventually return to what you were, you'll advance to become someone your previous self could barely imagine. Someone who has not only survived the storm, but learned to dance in the rain, to find meaning in the lightning, to hear messages in the thunder. The gratitude your future self feels now is not the simplistic kind that ignores the difficult aspects of life. It's a deep and complex gratitude that includes everything, the moments of beauty and the moments of despair, the connections and the losses, the achievements and the failures. This gratitude doesn't depend on perfect circumstances or an absence of challenges. It comes from recognizing that every experience, even the most painful, has contributed in some way to the richness of the life he now knows. It's a gratitude that doesn't deny any part of the journey, but honors every step of the way as necessary and meaningful. What your future self most wants to convey to you now is the profound certainty that, although the road ahead may seem long and sometimes daunting, you are not alone on it. Not just because there are other human beings walking alongside you, although that is also true and important, but because future versions of you have already traveled this path. In a way that transcends our linear understanding of time, your future self has already overcome these challenges that now seem insurmountable. And if you can, in your darkest moments, remember this, remember that the healing you seek has already been realized, that the strength you need has already been found, that the peace that seems impossible has already been achieved. You will discover a source of hope and resilience that can never be exhausted. And so, dear friend, as you continue your journey through this unknown territory, know that I am here, not just as a distant voice offering guidance, but as a living promise of what is to come. The distance between where you are now and where I am is not measured in kilometers or years, but in understandings, in small moments of surrender, in daily choices to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. Every step you take, however small it may seem, is bringing our worlds closer together. And one day, a day that will come sooner than you think, you will find yourself exactly where I am now, looking back in awe at the path you have traveled, the person you have become, and the wisdom that is now yours to share with others who are still finding their way through the darkness.